Hey guys, this is miicrow here. AGS just put out some combat reworks. They're fixing some of the bugs introduced by the patch, but for the most part, they are leaving bugs in the patch in the game, which to me is a really big concern because I would say the combat in Season 4 was the best, and every patch it feels like we're moving away from that to some degree. Like it's been one step forward, and honestly like kind of 3 to 4 steps back, not even 2 steps back. It's been pretty bad. And they're fixing two of the bugs of this up-and-coming patch that's coming out tonight. You guys will see this video tomorrow, so once you guys see this video, it will be out. What they're fixing here is they're fixing the stamina bug, which was probably the most annoying thing that came out in the patch, because you would just dodge and you would get gray barred if you didn't know the exact way to work around the bug, so it was messing up a bunch of people's muscle memory. It just overall felt really awful. As well as they are nerfing Healing Breeze. The Healing Breeze one, I think, is a little bit more interesting of a decision because, like, if I were to, like, lay out the priority list of bugs, this would not be on the top of the list at all. This would be, like, probably mid to bottom of the list. Like, the Gearscore thing it's, like, a way bigger deal, but I get that that's, like, a way harder thing to fix because it's a fundamental problem within the game itself. But this feels a little bit out of touch. What they're doing here is they're nerfing the amount of healing that you're getting pretty significantly here. So it's going from 20 to 14%. So it's almost like a third of two-thirds of the value that you're getting. And they're making it way harder to trigger and making it so that it only triggers off of healing from abilities. This healing from abilities part is kind of interesting because there's a few weapons that have like a few passive ways to trigger this in the past. So if you're like looking at Hatchet, for example, if you defy death, then you are healing, but this isn't like necessarily an ability, right? Like is an ability like Berserk, Feral Rush, Raging Torrent, like all of these things, are these abilities or passives abilities? Like I would think that passives would fall into that category. So defy death would be something that would trigger it. So there's like a few weapons where I think this is still useful for. Hatchet's kind of interesting because of defy death, but the main one is like Greatsword because of critical comeback. This already procs once every 10 seconds anyway, so it's like it's very common to get this up. And then that will trigger the healing, and you'll get a good amount of healing from that. So I think it's worth running for a few classes, but that's kind of interesting. And just overall, I think it's just a bit out of touch, out of sync. And if you guys want to kind of talk more about this stuff, I've been talking a lot in general. We've been going on and on and on about things that AGS are introducing, a lot of bugs, how to work around the bugs, etc. And I don't push notifications here unless you guys select a rule that gets a notification for either Twitch or YouTube stuff. So, small shout out there. That's in the description. Otherwise, there are a few things that I think are worth talking about. I think it's worth talking about a leak for the PvP zone. So, this red line here is the current map. AGS changed the live map of CK to include this blue part. It's very obvious this is where the PvP zone is going. They're just going to slap it in here. See how we get over it. The thing that I think is really interesting is, like, if you look at this, like, I think it's pretty clear in order to get to this PvP zone, you're going to have to travel through this, like, kind of narrow-ish strip of land if it's, like, actually embedded into the map. So it's not like you're, like, in a battle royale where everything, like, kind of expands outward. Like, you can definitely camp this line, kind of catch people there from a PvP zone perspective and probably just pick up a few kills. Like if they're actually going to do that, I think it's going to be a real choke point. Like if you have to go in to get some sort of resource, you get out. Like I assume it's something like Albion here where it's like there's important resources in the PvP zone. Otherwise, I don't know why they would make it. Then people can just basically spawn camp this like it's like Tarkov or something like that. And that's going to create an interesting predicament that I don't think will be fun for a lot of people, but we'll wait and see. The other thing, too, is I want to talk about the Gearscore stuff, because this is kind of interesting how to work around this. So what I have here is like a line that relatively tells you how tanky you are. Excuse me. Basically, if this number goes down, you become more tanky. If this number goes up, you become less tanky. And I just wanted to play with some of these things so you guys can kind of understand how this bug is working. So if you lower your defender gear score, this goes down, right? So that means you're becoming more tanky. So as your gear score gets lower, you get progressively more tanky. We already kind of understood that. This equation I originally thought was like partially wrong, but it actually turned out to be right. So that's kind of cool. The other thing here too is if your attacker's weapon gear score goes down, then you also get more tanky. Okay, this makes sense. This is why gear score feels like it kind of matters for weapons and why it matters for weapons the most. But the interesting thing is, like, when you lower your attacker gear score, then the damage effectively goes up, right? So your goal from like an attacker perspective is basically to drop your gear score as much as possible, and then have the defender's gear score be as high as possible, have your weapon gear score be as high as possible. So basically you just want one weapon that does damage, another weapon that is like level 75. You can get these level 75 weapons from the starter area in Monarch's Bluffs or in Windsward, and that will just maximize your damage. The other thing that's noteworthy too is like when you drop your gear score, you will drop your armor rating. But if I use an example that I have in game where so you see where this line is like right now, right? It's like 0.468 or whatever. If I drop down to 600, my armor in game in the same heavy set is 2,386 or 83. That's lower than where that original line was. So you actually become more tanky with less gear score, which is leading these weird spots where some people are like advertising as like I'm a level 100 or like I'm a 100 gear score PvP tank or something stupid like that, and you just become like incredibly tanky to the point where it's like basically broken. And I'm a little surprised they aren't adjusting this, but it's like kind of a hard thing to fix. Like, look at this formula. Like, how are you going to adjust this from like an AGS perspective? There's a few things in here that are very obviously like poorly optimized. First thing that someone pointed out that was like really, really smart, and one of my DMs is this is a 1.2 exponent here, right? There is no mathematical operator for exponents that is easy for a computer to use that is a fractional exponent. So like multiplying or having an exponent to 1.2 is much, much worse computationally and performance wise than having something squared, just because having something squared is like a little bit easier for a computer to do since they don't have to deal with the logarithms and exponents. There are tricky ways to get around this. Like you can use like the thing called Taylor series to model it out, so it's not like exactly correct, but it's like approximately correct. And then AGS could do that, or they could just, if I'm thinking about redesigning this and trying to optimize my game from a console perspective, like maybe I'm trying to get rid of this 1.2 and try to figure out a better way to make armor and gear score feel more impactful. The other thing too is I feel like armor, like your average gear score, shouldn't necessarily affect damage done and damage taken. And if it did affect that, higher gear score should make you deal more damage, and lower gear score should make you take less damage. Like, I don't know. Like, I think but the reason why they kind of made this so that if you have lower gear score, you effectively become more tanky is for like lower level PvP playing against a higher level PvP player. But like, it's an MMO of like, if I'm a level 35 dude with like 400 gear score or something like that, like I'm expecting to almost get one tap by an endgame player. Like, that should not be a close fight, and I'm kind of confused why AGS is like catering towards that, and it's breaking their game because they're catering towards that. Like, in my opinion, if you were to like look at this, I would probably try to get rid of this defender's gear score term, the attacker gear score term, just have those two average gear scores basically depend, like get rid of them so that the only thing that matters from a defense perspective is how good your armor is, and then how good, like from a PvP and PvE it's going to be a little bit different, but in PvP how good your armor is should matter, and your attributes should matter as well, right? And that should be enough to take care of that top factor. And I don't know why they're like artificially creating more weight to this value. The weapon gear score I kind of understand a little bit more, it having a bigger impact on like damage and whatnot. But like even then, like I think it shouldn't necessarily be gear score dependent. It should just be based off the weapon damage that you do. Like, I'm confused why they added this artificial term in to have a weighting for gear score when that should just be baked into the stats inside the game, if that makes sense. So like if I am running like a mithril hatchet or something like that at 700 gear score and I'm using appropriate stats, I'll have this base damage parameter, right? And like that should be like the only thing that influences damage. I don't know why there's this gear score thing. And if they wanted to like, buff everything's damage, and you just make the scaling a little bit better for hatchet or something like that. Like, I don't know why we have to go to these lengths to like try to balance something that like doesn't need to be balanced per se. I just think if your lower gear score should just take more damage and should just be as simple as that. Like, I don't understand why that is complicated, but apparently it is. So let me know your guys' thoughts on that. Let me know if you think that like entry level players should have like an advantage in terms of PvP or whatnot. And I'll see you guys on the next one. I'll make sure to put this Gearscore thing in a description too if you guys want to play around with this and try to optimize some stuff. But the armor rating is a little bit tricky to figure out, but you can figure it out in game pretty easily by just looking at your character. With that being said, we'll see how that new system plays out. Hopefully it's a little bit less buggy. Still feels pretty buggy to me, and I will see you guys in the next video.